How's it going, everybody? My name's Seth Martin with GoGuide. I have Ray Jarvis here with the Salt of the Earth. Thanks a lot for joining us, Ray. Really looking forward to diving into a conversation with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Of course. And I've been trying to figure out how to pronounce this, but is it Mattapoisett, Massachusetts, where you're out of?
It's Mattapoisett. Yeah, or Matt.
Mattapoisett. I was a little bit off there, but
You want to pronounce the
um,
P's angry, you can.
and have you always been from there? Are you born and raised?
Yep. Yeah, I grew up there, and I live in Westport, Mass now, but I grew up in Mattapoisett. So on
Okay.
Buzzards Bay, kind of fishing that area, the Elizabeth Islands, some Cape Cod stuff out towards the vineyard.
Awesome. And have you always been primarily a saltwater fisherman, or have you dabbled in the freshwater
I've done a
throughout
little
your
bit of
years?
everything. When the saltwater stuff slows down here, I always kind of gravitated towards freshwater, so a lot of stocked trout ponds and bass fishing, stuff like that.
Oh yeah.
Um, but we get a good striped bass holdover population around here, so I
Okay.
try get after those in the winter months.
Yeah, yeah. So that brings me to kind of my next question. As far as species, it seems like striped bass is kind of your primary target, but I was kind of reading, sounds like you do some other species around there. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, striped bass, obviously, kind of a year-round target. I mean, they migrate, but we get some that stay here, so they're always a fan favorite. But we get plenty of bluefish and false albacore, Atlantic bonito, and plenty of ground fish like sea bass, fluke, stuff like that. But we also get some nearshore and offshore tuna fishing, which is pretty fun.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And you obviously split between fly fishing and conventional for your guided trips.
Yep, I do both. I do both myself, so I offer both on the trips. And, whether beginner or expert, we can kind of figure it out as far as your skill level. So I enjoy light tackle in general, so fly fishing, and when we're spin fishing, it's always pretty light gear.
Yeah. And how long have you been a guide in the industry, Ray?
Since I was 20, so just about almost 20 years, because
Oh
I'm
wow.
I'm 39 in June, so but it's been on and off. I did it pretty steady when I was younger, and then took a break, had other interests, and came back to it. But I always kind of did it on the side a little bit, and got my captain's license young, and just used it when I could through the years. But been a bit more full time the last 5 or so years.
There you go. How was that initial transition? Obviously, 20, you're pretty young, but that initial transition from being just a conventional fisherman to actually a guide and educator.
It seemed kind of seamless. I was working at a tackle shop when I was younger, and I was just obviously obsessed with fishing. I started working as a mate with a local captain, and then from there, people were asking me to take them out on their boats and show them techniques and spots. And eventually, I got my captain's license, ran some trips for other captains, but also ran my own. Um, but I did a lot of guiding on other people's vessels around here. So just kind of teaching them how to fish on their boat and how to navigate and fish local waters around here.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I'm assuming you grew up going out on boats, familiar with it if you were working out of a tackle shop. Was it difficult getting that captain's license, or was that a pretty
It
seamless
it
achievement?
wasn't that difficult. It was a 2 week course, and it's pretty intensive. So there's a lot to learn in those 2 weeks, but they really kind of drill it into you. So by the time you take the tests, if you pay attention at all, it's pretty easy. The hardest part
Yeah.
really is the sea time and just having that documented and verified.
Yeah, so I assume they need somebody. Do you need somebody that kind of like a permers learn it, somebody almost to like notarize your hours? Or how exactly does
So
that work for maybe some of the newer people?
if you had worked for another captain, then you would have that captain kind of fill it out and vouch for the days that you were on a vessel with them. But you can also vouch for your own days on the water. But
Okay.
they have a form that you fill out, and you just kind of attest to the time that you put in or the time that you had on other vessels.
And how many hours is that, I guess, that you have to complete before meeting that
Um,
first qualification?
I believe to get your OUPV, which is your six pack, is 360 days. I'm
Okay.
not 100% sure if that's the exact number, but that's the rough number.
Somewhere
And
around
then
there.
if you
Okay.
go up from there, you need time on larger vessels. And I think um, the time needed goes up, depending on the tonnage of your license. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, when you say six pack, you're referring to being able to take six people out on the water. Is that correct?
yeah, that's kind of like your base level captain's license, and that allows you to take up to six people on an uninspected vessel. So,
Okay.
if you were to start trying to work on a ferry or something, you would need like a 50 or a 100 ton.
Right.
Yeah,
Well, that's interesting. So is the boat that you run, I guess, then a six pack?
it
Is
is.
that how
Yeah.
many people you're willing to take out, or do you cut it off kind of before then?
No, that's the max I would take on my boat, anyways. Right now, I'm working on a 100-ton license, but that's for other things I got going on besides guiding.
Yeah.
But on my bigger boat, I'll take up to six anglers, and the smaller boat, I'll take up to four.
Okay. And do you, I mean, a six angler seems like a lot of people for a single captain. Do you ever bring on a deckhand or anything like that, or are you typically managing that full time
It's
yourself?
it's just me. If there's six people on board, then generally not everybody's fishing. There's definitely times where everybody is fishing, but um, even if they are, hopefully not. Or it would be fun if all six were hooked up, but hopefully not all six are hooked up at the same time.
Yeah, yeah, that's a
Then
good
it
but
gets
a
interesting.
problem to have.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah,
good problem, but a problem.
definitely. I could see the craziness with multiple lines in the water and fish swimming out each way to each and every
Yeah,
way.
yeah, we've had
Um,
bluefin tuna trips off the Cape and been tripled up, quadded up, and it's fish that are 100 to 200 pounds going all different directions and definitely chaotic.
wow,
Yeah,
those bluefin tuna are some amazing specimens
yeah, yeah. We're
as
lucky
far
enough.
as speed and pure power.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're lucky enough to get them from about late May until December around here.
Okay.
Yeah,
And I assume you're going offshore for those using conventional. What is the process of, I guess, of kind of tracking those down, hunting them? Um, I've
um,
had a little bit of experience of searching for boils and things like that, but can you just
yeah.
kind of expand on that process a little bit more?
So it has a lot to do with temperature breaks and as well as like bait concentrations. So um, as the season progresses here, we get biomasses of sand eels that push into the area as well as mackerel and herring. And as the season goes on, you kind of get these temperature breaks, but also areas offshore with different subtle structure like drop offs and things like that where fish will congregate basically. And, it's some areas are predictable where the fish might show up for certain parts of the year. But really, it's more networking with other captains who are on the water in different areas and, using that intel that you get, but also sharing intel with the right people, to receive intel back. So
Right.
there's definitely some fleets that are common, so areas where you'll often see a lot of boats, but there's definitely these other bites that go on where it's the guys who are on it all the time and sharing it with the people they choose to share it with.
Right.
So
That
it's a
seems to
lot.
be,
Go ahead.
I'd say that seems to be a pretty common situation in the guiding slash commercial fishing industry as far as having almost like a network of guides that you guys all kind of share information on.
Yeah,
Um, I mean, it seems like that's what makes or breaks, a lot of these fishing trips is the amount of information and intel you can receive from other people out on the water. Does that
yeah, yeah.
sound
It
about
definitely
right?
helps. You have your knowledge and the spots that you hit and different times of the year and tides and whatnot, but um, networking with other captains that are in the area or fishing other parts of the bay, and kind of cueing you in on a bite is always helpful.
Yeah. So for those bluefin, do you typically are you coming up on boils or are you trolling for them? Casting,
Um,
toppers. What do you
Primarily
what's the
throwing
method there?
poppers and jigging for them, so just like jig
Okay.
and pop style. I don't
Yeah.
really troll. I definitely have in the past, but on the trips that I'm running, it's all jig and pop for the most part. Or we'll fish live bait on like bigger reels, like 80s and 130s.
Yeah. I
So
like that a
we're
lot.
looking. Sorry, we're looking for not necessarily life on the surface all the time, but areas where fish may be or may have been previous days, and kind of looking for marks down deep if we're jigging, but also, if we're throwing top water, obviously looking for fish on the surface. You'll often see them airing out or birds kind of milling on the surface, and fish aren't far behind. So,
Yeah. That's awesome. And what's typically your season for that bluefish bite?
um, so the bluefin really show up in force. It seems like late June, early July around here. Um, and they definitely there are fish that push through earlier. We get a lot of giants that push up sooner than the smaller fish. Excuse me. But down, in New York and off Jersey, they're seeing fish before we are. So it's kind of like varies each year, but I would say it's a safe bet by early July.
Okay. And that typically has to do with water temperature, right? As it warms up in the warmer months, it kind of pushes those fish up
Yeah,
higher.
yeah.
Um,
That's why you'll see some bigger fish earlier, because they can withstand the colder water
okay,
a little easier
gotcha.
than smaller fish.
And how far will they migrate up the coast?
I think it's not really a coastal migration. It's more like a transatlantic or
Okay.
Gulf Stream kind of migration. So we get fish that come from like the Mediterranean and then down in the Gulf as far as they know. And those fish, they're catching giant bluefin in like PEI in Canada, Gulf of Maine. Um, I've seen stuff recently of them catching bluefin off the UK.
Oh,
So those
wow.
fish are all over the place, but
Yeah.
who knows where they're coming from exactly.
Well, that's very interesting. I had no idea that they moved that far up to Canada, never less than the UK.
Yeah, I think
Um,
fish that they've tagged off the coast here have ended up in the Mediterranean. So
wow.
there's a lot of transatlantic stuff going on and all kinds of interesting
Yeah.
movement.
Yeah, that's amazing, those species. But with that being said, that doesn't seem to be your primary species. Of course, the striped bass,
Yeah.
an amazing fish. I got the opportunity to fish for striped bass up in Maine last summer, about August time. Sadly, I
Nice.
didn't have very much. It was much luck. It was all DIY fishing from um, docks and the surf and just kind of what I can make. And I
Yeah,
think we were a little bit too early because those is that's a coastal migration, isn't it, for those
it
fish?
is.
Or
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
okay,
So those fish come from like the Hudson and Chesapeake where they're spawning, and then they push up the coast. I think they go further south, like down towards like North Carolina. I don't even know how far south they go really, but
yeah,
we see that migration push into our waters. Usually, like middle end of April, we'll start seeing fresh fish, if not sooner. But they push right up to Maine, Nova Scotia. So it's quite the migration.
wow. And are you fishing for them using conventional tackle setup or fly or both?
I'm doing a little bit of both. So like I said earlier, it's all light tackle regardless. So we're not using heavy or big spinning reels. We're using like 3 to 5,000 class spinning reels on 7 foot medium light action spinning rods, and then
Yeah,
like 7 and 9 weight fly rods, maybe 10 weights. Um,
Okay. Yeah.
but doing a little bit of both. So sometimes fly fishing is more effective, sometimes spinning is more effective. But we're doing like more subtle presentations this time of year, soft plastics and smaller flies. And then as the season goes on and we get more bait pushing into the waters, we use bigger baits, bigger presentations.
And what's the best time of year to go target stripers with you?
Um, Pretty much anytime from the end of April until the beginning of November. There's a lot of fish pushing through the waters, migrating up the coast from April until mid June or so, and then fish kind of stage up for the summer. So we're fishing a little bit deeper in the middle of the summer, or we're going out to Block Island and fishing that kind of trophy fishery. And then in the fall, we start to see fish migrating back down the coast. So with all the small bait that was born earlier in the season, that all kind of starts to flush out of the estuaries, timed with the striped bass migration. So it's can be a real exciting time of year. And we also get false albacore and bonito showing up in those later months. But
Okay.
striped bass, it's pretty much good from May to November.
So we're in it now.
We're in it
So
now. Yep. Yeah, I
there
just
we
had a
go.
trip this morning and I'm booked up the rest of the week here. So
Well, that's great to hear. Um, and yeah, so say somebody was going to book a trip with you, kind of run them through your typical day out on the water, say they want to target stripers. What other fish are you going to run into? What time do you start? How long does it last? I just kind of go through what that looks like.
so I run like 4 or 7 hour trips, half day or full day, and those times are open to interpretation. Obviously, we're not going to rush in to be at the dock on 4 hours or 7 hours, but
Right.
typically we're going to start pretty early in the morning. I just like an early morning bite, and as long as we have a good tide, then which we generally do, then we're going to be fishing early. If I have a 2 trip day, I'll run afternoon trips, but I'll try push it into the later part of the afternoon. Just low light seems to be better in general. Um, and as far as the trip goes, I leave a lot out of Westport. That's where I live, and that's kind of where I fish out of a lot. But we'll be fishing anywhere from like Upper Buzzards Bay out to the Elizabeth Islands, over to Newport area, Rhode Island, and you know the species that you're going to see are obviously striped bass, bluefish, and as the season goes on, we start to see other species like false albacore, bonito. We've been seeing Spanish mackerel, king mackerel. I know some guys that caught cobia last year, so
Oh, wow.
uh, the fisheries changed a little bit over the years, but we're just seeing a little bit more variety and a little bit of a longer season. So
Yeah,
not
and
all.
that would lead us to perfectly kind of dive into specifically the striper fishery. Obviously, you work with the American Saltwater Association. Um, can you talk a little bit how that fishery has been impacted in the past, couple seasons, what it's kind of projected to look like, and possibly what you guys have been working over there at the Guides Association on how we could help it?
Yeah, those the guys at the Saltwater Guides Association have been pushing hard for striped bass conservation and um, trying to shut down, not necessarily shut down commercial fisheries, but shut down, over harvest and uh, kind of preserve the certain year classes that are the strongest at this point in time. There hasn't been a lot of good recruitment in the last few years. So recruitment meaning like spawning. So the future of the fishery is kind of uncertain. So they're really pushing to get things in place to make sure that there's going to be more recruitment in the future based on preserving the fish that we do have.
Right.
And unnecessary harvest and I mean unnecessary pressure, but you can't really do anything about the pressure. But the pressure that those fish see is like coast wide, so minimizing the harvest state to state is definitely key. But just kind of educating people and making sure the fishery is managed properly is more important than anything. Um,
100%.
yeah,
And
so I think they've done a good job of getting the word out there and kind of making people aware of why it's important. And I think that's been the biggest part is just spreading the word and getting the word out there. So hopefully in the future we'll have the fishery. But it's
yeah,
definitely a cyclical thing. I remember when I was a kid, catching a big striped bass was kind of unheard of. And then, late 90s, early 2000s, it started to really pick up and we were seeing big fish around again, big numbers. I know like the commercial fishery was strong. Guys were taking 30 fish a day, no problem. Um, and then it started to see a dive. And, you could kind of see it locally. We just didn't see the populations of fish that we were seeing on the Elizabeth Islands like we used to. And then you saw it commercially where guys weren't really filling the quota. So, they were kind of trying to roll over quota to the next year or a variety of different things. But that's a pretty big indicator when the commercial fleet can't fill their quota. And, their harvest compared to a recreational harvest is minimal, but it's a good gauge because those guys know what they're doing. So if they're not
right,
filling their quota, there's obviously an issue.
right. Yeah, it seemed like based off what I've read, the overall objective is just to protect that striper population and make sure that it remains healthy and to keep it in a area that it can always bounce back to those, I guess, regulatory numbers that we've seen in the past. Because
Yep.
obviously, like many things, populations can go in waves of having high points and low points. We just want to make sure essentially that they don't drop down below a certain point to where they can't rebuild.
Right. Right. Um, so they're making an impression on the fishing community and hopefully the scientific community, and it's all positive. And I feel like those guys are pretty across the board. Even they're not really biased one way or the other. They're just putting the information out there and pushing to preserve the species. Um, so I think that's a good thing. And they've also done work with other species. Like they did a project last summer with false albacore, kind of trying to learn more about those fish and their movements. Um, so it's just all good stuff.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit more about false albacore because honestly, I'm just unfamiliar. I'm familiar with striped bass, but I really have never targeted or gone after false albacore, and it's a fish that I hear about a lot working in the industry. So,
Yeah, they're really popular up here, and I would say down the coast to like North Carolina or so. And once you get south of that, it seems like they're more of a bait fish. They're more readily available and not as targeted. Up here, it's like people can't wait for algae season, and
yeah,
people are all fired up, getting their epoxy jigs and soft plastics and flies all ready. Um, and it can be a frustrating fish to target. They're up here, then they're down, and they're over there, and then they're down. So you're like running and gunning all over the place. People's heads are constantly on a swivel, um, and it's exciting, but it can be a tough fishery. But honestly, there aren't many fish around here that fight as well as those things for their size.
right. Yeah. So how big do they get?
We catch them, on average like 5 to 10 pounds or so, but you get some bigger ones. I've seen them up to like 14, 15 pounds.
Wow.
I know there's bigger ones, but I haven't caught many of those, like horse albies or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, but they're fun to catch. I mean, they'll push bait right up on the beaches and they'll push into estuaries, so you can catch them in a variety of places. I've caught them offshore on our way back in from targeting bluefin and yellowfin, but I've also caught them up inside rivers. So it really
Okay.
depends on where they decide to push and like how much bait is around. And just varies season to season. There's definitely areas where you tend to see them more often than not, but it varies year to year.
Yeah,
Yeah,
seems like a fish that moves around a lot. Um,
yeah,
and speaking of, I read, or go ahead.
they cover a lot of ground. It's
Yeah,
funny. It'll be one side of a bay in the morning, and then the other side by the afternoon. So
yeah, incredible, incredible how much they travel. Um, I read on your website that you also can target marlin. Is that correct? White marlin, I believe.
yeah, they are around up here, and when we go offshore tuna fishing and stuff, you'll often see them kind of like milling around on the surface. So we have targeted them in the past. Kind of always have certain things on the boat ready, like eel-looking soft plastics and stuff like that. So you can definitely target them, but I wouldn't say it's like a common target species.
Yeah, more of a
But
rare
I've
occurrence if
caught
you
plenty of
spot
them
them.
over the years, and they're unique and exciting. But I've had days out there where I've just seen dozens of them, and they can be really tough to catch, but just pretty cool to see them. It's neat that we have that fish around here.
Yeah. What's the difference? I've obviously out here in the Pacific we have striped marlin and blue marlin.
Yeah.
What's the difference in them and a white marlin?
White marlin is just a lot smaller in general, and they have kind of like a whiter finish on their side. So
Okay.
we get blue marlin offshore, and I don't know about any other species. I mean, we get swordfish in the canyons and stuff, and we used to have more swordfish up closer inland here. There used to be like a harpoon fishery for them, but um, most of the bill fishing now is kind of offshore.
Yeah. And they're typically, you said you're spotting them, so you typically seeing almost like a dorsal fin coming through
Yeah,
the water, or what's that look like?
you'll see a dorsal and a tail, and if when we've seen them come into the spread, if we're trolling in the past, same idea. You kind of see that like bill come up and slash, and then you'll see a dorsal and a tail, and they get pretty fired up. They're zigzagging back and forth, so
Yeah.
they're cool to see. They're pretty visual and just an amazing fish.
Yeah, that's amazing that you guys have such a wide variety of species out there. Um,
Yeah, we get a lot of mahi as well. Mahi will push in later in the season as the water warms up. Every
okay.
year people catch them like right up inshore a few times a year. You'll hear about it, but generally they're just offshore a little ways, and they'll hang around high flyers and buoys and things like that. So
Yeah, I was gonna say
another,
I fish from out here, but we typically target them off kelp. Is it kind of that same
yeah,
process or any sort of
anything
structure?
exactly anything floating, anything that they can kind of congregate around. So whether
Right.
it's buoys, seaweed, a floating pallet, a floating bucket, anything like that. You
Yeah.
see something floating offshore, definitely take some shots at it.
That's awesome. I assume that's a some sort of safety mechanism for those fish. I mean, it has to be, right? They feel
Yeah, I
comfortable with
think
something there.
yeah, I think it's just there's not really any other structure out there, so bait fish are going to congregate around it, and then bigger fish are going to congregate around those bait fish, and so on. I think you kind of have that like seamount effect where it's creating something different in the environment, and so you're going to get the bait fish and then the rest of the food chain behind that.
Right. Yeah, very, very interesting to see that.
Yeah,
Um, amazing. Amazing you guys have such a wide variety. So going out of Massachusetts, obviously there's multiple guide services, charters in
yeah.
the area. I guess, can you tell us a little bit of why someone would choose you or what you do a little bit differently than a few of those other, businesses around there?
There's a lot of good charter captains around here. I work close with a lot of them, sharing intel and trading trips and this and that. I feel like, I have a lot of experience on the water. Um, I know a variety of locations really well. So I'm able to kind of stay on the fish through the season. And by my own knowledge as well as working with other guides. Um, and I have a background kind of in the fisheries world, so I have a lot of knowledge about the local ecology. So, on my trips, I'm trying to put you on fish, but I'm also, educating you a little bit about the local fishery that we have and, why the fish are doing what they're doing today. So you're learning, maybe better technique with the rod and reel and presentation with lure and stuff. Um, but you're also learning why the fish are doing what they're doing and when they're doing it, so that maybe you can go out in the future and use that bit of knowledge that you gained from our trip to kind of put to your own practices. So,
Right.
um,
I love that. It seems like the best types of guide trips out there are the ones that are educational for the client. A lot of people kind of have this perspective of, whether you catch fish or not makes a trip, and that's just simply not true. It's
right.
really the knowledge that you get from your guide, or the learning experience, and even the ability to go back out and do it on your own if possible because of how much you have learned. And it seems like
Yeah,
that's what
absolutely.
you provide.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of fishermen out there that you know see other guys in locations, and so they may know some spots. They may know some lures to throw, this and that, but a lot of that comes down to just technique and presentation and getting those bites from bigger fish or finicky fish. Takes time on the water and knowing how fish are going to react in different situations. So I think by hiring a guide, you get to fine tune your skills, and if that guide can provide you with some knowledge on the fish that you're targeting at that time of year and maybe on that specific tide, it's invaluable information.
Right. And with that being said, we get a ton of young guides or people brand new to the industry, coming and asking for, how can I become the best guide, or how can I make sure that my clients are satisfied every trip and want to repeat again next year with me. So I guess with that being said, what would you give, 20-year-old yourself for advice as just getting into the industry with your new guide service and how to grow that and maintain quality through that?
I think just kind of staying humble and taking whatever information and tidbits and knowledge you can gain from other anglers, whether it's the people that you're guiding or other guides themselves, um, and learning how to network with other guides is huge. Not only to gain trips, but also to gain knowledge and to work together on the water. There's plenty of places where there's a sense of competition. You see it or you've heard about it down in the Keys where there's a ton of guides, obviously. And there's a lot more guides around here these days, but I think the key is to just work with the people that you mesh well with and, you know, take the opportunity to listen to somebody else. You know, Plenty of us know a lot about fishing, but there's always another perspective. And
Right.
being open to that, I've learned a lot from other guides where I'm like, wow, I never even would have thought of that. But just another approach, another technique, just something different can expand on your skill level.
Right, 100%. Yeah, there's always something to learn in this industry. I mean,
Yeah,
it's just the truth. You're never going to know everything you can.
right.
So kind of coming at it with an open-minded perspective and taking advice for some of these, older veteran guides is extremely important on
Yeah,
how to ensure that was quality in those trips.
yeah, and every day you're on the water, you're learning something. The days I learn the most are the days that I catch the least amount of fish. So it's you're trying a little bit harder. You're maybe observing a little bit more. Whereas if you can't do any wrong one day, you're really just kind of enjoying fighting fish. You're obviously learning something that day, but every day you're on the water, you're learning. But those days where it's tougher, you're definitely gaining a little bit more knowledge. So not to get discouraged on those days. It's just that's fishing.
Yeah, I absolutely love that answer. Um, well, that's amazing, Ray. I guess is there anything else you'd like to touch on? I've had a great conversation with you up to this point,
No, I
and really
just
think,
I appreciate the opportunity to talk, and um, people out there definitely respect your fishery, and um, go out with some guides and learn some techniques and just enjoy it. It's all about having fun, and like I said before, the bad days are good days too, as long as you're on the water.
yeah, yeah. Well, thank you very much, Ray. You're obviously very knowledgeable, and if you guys are in the Massachusetts area, go book a trip with Ray. Obviously, an amazing guide and amazing person to be out on the water with. So, thanks again, and good talking with you.